I still remember the first Valentine's Day we spent together, even though at the time it did not seem like something that would become a tradition. The city was full of couples and warm lights shining through restaurant windows while the cold February air carried that quiet romantic atmosphere that always made me feel slightly out of place. I had never really cared much about Valentine's Day before, or at least that is what I always told myself. The truth was that every year the day reminded me of something I did not have, as in something I secretly wished for but never admitted out loud. That afternoon I was at home, trying to distract myself with random things that did not really matter, when my phone buzzed with a message from him. His name appearing on the screen always had a strange effect on me. It was something simple and ordinary, yet my heart always reacted before my mind had time to process anything. He asked if I was free that evening. It sounded casual, like any other message he had sent countless times before, but something about it felt different. He arrived later than he had promised, but that was normal for him. When I opened the door, the first thing I noticed was the way he looked that evening. He had clearly made an effort, though he would never admit it. His hair was slightly messy in the way that somehow looked intentional, and he wore a dark jacket that made him look more serious than usual. There was a familiar relaxed confidence in the way he stood there, like someone who belonged exactly where he was. The evening itself felt simple at first. We went to a small restaurant that neither of us had visited before. It was warm and softly lit, with candles on every table and quiet music in the background. I noticed immediately that every other table was occupied by couples. People leaned close to each other, sharing food, laughing softly, speaking in voices low enough that their words felt private even in a crowded room. Being there with him felt strangely natural and strangely confusing at the same time. We had spent countless evenings together before, studying, walking through the city, or simply sitting somewhere talking about nothing and everything at once. Yet this evening felt slightly different, like something invisible had shifted in the air between us. Our friendship had started years earlier in a way that seemed almost accidental. During the first week of university, we had both gotten lost while trying to find the same lecture hall. The building was large and confusing, and after several minutes of wandering through the wrong corridors, we had ended up laughing about how neither of us seemed capable of navigating a simple campus map. That shared moment of confusion had turned into a conversation, and that conversation somehow turned into a friendship that grew stronger with every passing month. Over time, he became one of the most important people in my life without me even realizing how it happened. We studied together, complained about professors together, celebrated small victories together. He had seen me at my worst moments and somehow never judged me for them. When I went through my first serious breakup, he had sat with me for hours without saying anything particularly wise or comforting. Simply being there in a quiet and steady way that made everything feel a little less painful. Somewhere in the middle of those years something changed inside me. It did not happen suddenly or dramatically. It was more like a quiet realization that slowly formed over time, the way a sunrise appears gradually before anyone fully notices that the sky has become bright. I began to understand that the way I felt about him was no longer just friendship. It was something deeper and more complicated, something that made every small moment with him feel more meaningful than it should have. The difficult part was that I never knew how he felt. Sometimes he treated me like I was the most important person in the world, paying attention to details about me that even I forgot. Other times he behaved exactly like the friend he had always been, relaxed and comfortable in a way that suggested nothing unusual at all. That first Valentine's evening ended with a walk through the quiet streets of the city. The cold air made our breath visible in the soft glow of the streetlights. People passed us holding hands, wrapped in scarves and laughter, moving through the night as if the world belonged only to them. I tried not to compare myself to them, yet the thought lingered quietly in the back of my mind. At one point we passed a small stand selling roses. Without saying anything, he stepped aside for a moment and returned holding a single red flower. He handed it to me in the most casual way possible, as if the gesture meant nothing extraordinary. Yet the simple act carried a weight that stayed with me long after the evening ended. That rose eventually found its place pressed between the pages of a book on my shelf, where it remained as a quiet memory of that night. What surprised me most was that the evening did not remain an isolated moment. The following year, when Valentine's Day arrived again, he once more suggested that we spend the evening together. By then it had become almost natural to say yes. This time we went to a small cafe located on a rooftop overlooking the river. The sky above the city was clear and dark, filled with scattered stars that reflected faintly on the water below. Sitting there across from him, surrounded by candlelight and distant city sounds, the situation felt impossible to ignore. Everything about it resembled a romantic date, yet the unspoken label of friendship still existed between us like a quiet boundary neither of us had crossed. Despite that uncertainty, the evening felt warm and comfortable. He laughed easily, shared stories about work, and listened to everything I said with the same focused attention he always had. Sometimes he brushed a loose strand of hair away from my face when the wind blew it across my eyes, doing it so naturally that the gesture seemed almost unconscious. Moments like that made everything more confusing. They were small and simple actions, yet they carried a softness that made my heart react in ways I tried not to acknowledge. Even so, I never spoke about my feelings. Fear had a quiet but powerful presence inside me. The possibility of losing him entirely seemed far worse than the uncertainty of never knowing the truth. By the time the third Valentine's Day approached, our shared tradition felt almost inevitable. That evening he picked me up as usual, but something about him felt slightly different. There was a tension in the way he moved, a quiet nervous energy that did not match his usual calm confidence. Instead of going to a busy restaurant or cafe, he drove outside the city to a park that overlooked a wide open field. The sky was already fading into deep shades of blue and purple, and the last light of the sunset painted the horizon in soft colors. Small strings of lights had been arranged around a table placed beneath a group of trees, creating a quiet and intimate space that felt almost hidden from the rest of the world. Seeing it made something inside me shift. The careful effort behind that moment felt too meaningful to dismiss as a simple friendly gesture. The evening passed slowly as we shared food and conversation in the familiar rhythm we had always known. Yet beneath that comfortable surface there was a deeper awareness between us, as if both of us sensed that something important was about to change. Eventually the conversation drifted into quieter territory. Thoughts about relationships, time, and the strange ways life sometimes moves in unexpected directions began to surface. Listening to him speak about his feelings created a sense of vulnerability that I had never seen in him before. Then, in a quiet and honest moment, he admitted something that completely changed the direction of everything that had existed between us for years. The truth he revealed was simple and powerful at the same time. He had been in love with the same person for a long time. Realizing that the person he spoke about was me felt like the ground beneath my feet had shifted. For years I had protected my own feelings in silence, believing that revealing them might destroy the friendship that meant so much to both of us. Discovering that he had been carrying the same hidden emotions created a strange mixture of relief, surprise, and overwhelming happiness. The realization turned something complicated into something unexpected. Why simple? All the unspoken moments, the quiet gestures, the strange feeling that our connection had always been slightly more than friendship suddenly made sense. Standing there together in the soft glow of those lights, it felt as if years of uncertainty had quietly dissolved. The first kiss we shared was gentle and natural, as if it had been waiting patiently for the right moment to exist. Looking back now, it seems almost unbelievable that we spent so long circling around the truth without ever fully seeing it. Sometimes the most obvious feelings are the ones hidden in plain sight, waiting for courage and timing to bring them into the open. What began as a simple Valentine's outing between two friends had slowly grown into something much deeper. And in the end, the tradition that once existed without a clear meaning became the beginning of a new chapter that neither of us had dared to imagine before. The moment that followed felt strangely calm, even though everything in my life had just changed in a matter of seconds. For years I had imagined what it would be like if the truth between us ever surfaced, but the reality was softer and quieter than any dramatic scene my mind had created. There was no overwhelming shock or confusion anymore. Instead, there was a deep sense of relief, like finally understanding a story that had been slowly unfolding for a long time. As we stood there in that quiet park with the lights glowing gently around us, I realized how many memories suddenly looked different when seen through this new perspective. Every thoughtful gesture, every moment he had shown up when I needed someone, every time he remembered the smallest details about my life all carried a meaning that I had never fully allowed myself to accept before. On the drive back to the city, the silence between us felt comfortable rather than awkward. It was the kind of silence that existed between people who no longer needed to hide what they felt. The road stretched ahead under the dim glow of streetlights, and the quiet hum of the car created a calm rhythm that matched the steady beat of my heart. Even though everything had changed, something important remained exactly the same. Our friendship had always been the strongest part of our connection. The laughter, the honesty, the way we understood each other without needing many words were still there. Now they simply had room to grow into something deeper. In the days that followed, life did not suddenly transform into a perfect romantic story. In fact, many things stayed completely ordinary. We still met for coffee between busy work schedules. We still complained about small everyday frustrations. We still teased each other about the same old habits that had existed since our university days. But there was also a new warmth in those moments. Simple things felt different now. Walking side by side through the city, I noticed the way his hand naturally found mine, sitting together during quiet evenings. There was a new closeness that had never been openly acknowledged before. Sometimes I wondered how long we might have continued pretending if that conversation in the park had never happened. Perhaps we would have continued celebrating Valentine's Day together every year, calling it a friendly tradition while ignoring the deeper truth that had been quietly growing between us. Looking back on the earlier years, I realized how carefully both of us had protected the friendship we valued so much. Neither of us wanted to risk losing something that had become such an important part of our lives. Ironically, that same caution had also kept us from discovering the happiness that had been waiting just beyond that fear. The following Valentine's Day arrived almost before we noticed how quickly the months had passed. By then our relationship had already settled into a natural rhythm. There were still moments of uncertainty as we adjusted to this new version of us. But there was also a deep sense of stability that came from knowing we had already built years of trust before anything romantic began. That evening we returned to the same rooftop cafe overlooking the river where we had once sat as two friends pretending not to notice how the world around us looked like a scene from a love story. This time the atmosphere felt completely different. Nothing needed to be explained or hidden anymore. The city lights reflected across the dark water below just as they had before. The same quiet music drifted through the air, and couples still filled the tables around us. But now I no longer felt like someone observing romance from the outside. I realized that the most meaningful part of our story had never been the dramatic moment when everything was revealed. Instead, it was the slow journey that had brought us there. Years of friendship, shared experiences, and quiet loyalty had created something strong enough to grow into love without losing the foundation it was built on. Later that night, as we walked through the familiar streets, I noticed the same flower stand where he had once bought a single rose during our very first Valentine's outing together. Without hesitation, he stopped again and bought another one. This time the gesture felt different, not because it carried more meaning, but because the meaning was finally clear. The flower was no longer a mysterious symbol hidden behind friendship. It was simply a small reminder of how far we had come. As I held that rose in my hand, I felt a quiet gratitude for the strange and unpredictable way life sometimes works. The person who had once been just a friend who got lost with me in a university hallway had become someone far more important than I ever expected. And the tradition that began almost accidentally had turned into a memory that would always remind me of how love sometimes grows slowly, patiently waiting for the moment when the people are finally brave enough to see what has been there all along. After that Valentine's Day, life continued to move forward in its quiet, ordinary rhythm, but the meaning of our days together had completely changed. What once felt like a friendship full of unspoken tension had transformed into something more open and honest. I no longer needed to hide the small ways my heart reacted to him, and he no longer needed to pretend that his care for me was purely friendly. Still, the transition was not as dramatic as people might imagine. Because we had already known each other so deeply, there was no awkward stage of trying to figure out who the other person really was. We had seen each other exhausted after long days, frustrated during stressful moments, and vulnerable during times when life did not go as planned. Our relationship simply grew naturally out of everything we had already shared. Sometimes I caught myself remembering the earlier years and smiling at how blind we both had been. There were countless small memories that suddenly made perfect sense. The time he had waited outside my apartment for hours during a storm because I had forgotten my keys. The way he always noticed when I felt overwhelmed even before I said anything. The quiet pride in his eyes whenever I succeeded at something important. Back then I thought those moments were simply signs of a strong friendship. Now I understood they had always been something more. One evening, several weeks after that night in the park, we returned to the university campus where we had first met. The buildings looked smaller than I remembered, as if time had quietly changed their scale in my mind. Students hurried along the same pathways we once walked, carrying books and laughing with friends the way we used to. Standing there again felt like stepping into an earlier chapter of my life. We slowly walked toward the hallway where we had first spoken to each other years before. I could still picture the moment clearly, two confused students trying to find the correct lecture room, both pretending to understand the campus map while secretly having no idea where we were going. That accidental meeting had seemed insignificant at the time, yet it had quietly changed the direction of my entire life. As we walked through the familiar corridor, sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long reflections across the polished floor. Everything felt calm and peaceful, as if the place itself remembered the beginning of our story. I realized then how rare it is to find someone who grows alongside you through different stages of life. We had witnessed each other's fears, ambitions, mistakes, and hopes. We had supported each other through moments when things seemed uncertain and celebrated together when things finally worked out. Because of that shared history, our love carried a depth that felt different from anything I had experienced before. It was not built on sudden attraction or idealized expectations. It was built on years of knowing exactly who the other person truly was. Months passed, and slowly our friends and families began to see the shift that had happened between us. Many of them reacted with amused surprise. Some admitted they had suspected something long before we had realized it ourselves. Others simply smiled in a knowing way that made me wonder how obvious our feelings must have been from the outside. One afternoon, while cleaning my bookshelf, I came across the old novel where I had pressed the first rose he gave me years earlier. The petals had faded into a deep fragile red, delicate and slightly curled with time. Holding that flower again made me remember the uncertainty I once felt during those early Valentine's evenings. Back then I had believed those moments were temporary, small memories that would eventually fade like the petals of that rose. Instead, they had become the beginning of something lasting. The following winter arrived quietly, bringing cold air and early sunsets. As February approached once again, I found myself thinking about the strange tradition that had started everything. Valentine's Day no longer felt like a complicated or lonely holiday. It had become something meaningful to us in a way that was difficult to explain. On the evening of that day, he surprised me with something simple but thoughtful. Instead of taking me to a restaurant or cafe, he prepared dinner himself in his small apartment. The room was softly lit, and the windows revealed the city glowing under the winter night. It was not perfect. The food was slightly overcooked, and the candles melted unevenly across the table. But the entire evening felt warm and genuine in a way that mattered far more than perfection. While sitting there together, I realized that love does not always arrive in dramatic moments. Sometimes it grows quietly in the background of ordinary life, strengthening through shared experiences until one day it becomes impossible to ignore. Years earlier, I had believed Valentine's Day only highlighted what I did not have. Now it reminded me of something much more important. It reminded me that the person who once walked beside me simply as my best friend had always been the person I was meant to walk beside for the rest of my life.